Hola, soy Hernando. Tengo dificultad para expresarme en otro idioma que no sea el mío. Por ello, le he pedido a James que me preste amablemente su voz para dirigirme a ustedes.
The concepts of nature and culture have traditionally been differentiated in two distinct and separate spheres. However, geographers have reached a surprising conclusion in our day. It may be true that nature is nothing but a human cultural invention. Generation after generation, we have urbanized nature in order to inhabit it and transform it into our home, a refuge from everything that is out there. We have rototilled and domesticated nature to get it to produce our harvests century after century. This is the strange reality we have created. The sustainability of this process, as ancient as our own humanity, lies only in our hands. Greed and avarice in the accumulation of wealth in a senseless acceleration of time, as represented by clocks and calendars, is our glaring mistake. To symbolize the purpose of this study, I'm using this smaller blue metaphor that I will call iconosphere. The representations of things from our space are accumulated in the iconosphere, but without time. This is what Warburg attempted to conceptually order in his panels, associating paper reproductions and placing them physically in an intuitive order using thumbtacks. Nearly a century later, with an identical reflexive method, although with a different intention, David Hockney organized the signs he had collected in the course of his analysis, published in 2001 as Secret Knowledge. Coinciding with the development of refractive lenses in 1430, painters changed their techniques, prodigiously reproducing reality much as it was. 4 centuries of harmony and beauty then transpired until, towards the end of the 19th century, the massive popularization of physico-chemical photography caused many painters to be frightened into insanity and move further and further away from reality. In the early 1970s, Hockney signaled a new renaissance of harmony between man and machine with the eruption and expansion of computer technology. My iconosphere is also a Russian matryoshka, or nesting doll. Eisenstein's attractions gathered in it for a recycled montage, in accordance with Tolstoy's moral commitment. When I began this process, I thought that Ariadne's thread of the anthropomorphic chimeras would guide me through this unknown labyrinth. This is the most distant piece I have found until now. The man-lion from the Stadel Cave archaeological site in Germany. 20,000 years after the execution of that small sculpture, a man drew this witch doctor on the walls of the Trois Frères cave in France. Much later, an abundance of full-color Egyptian pictorial representations filled the walls of tombs. With time, representations also took shape on the surface of Greek ceramics, or on the interior murals of Mayan constructions. They acquired formal perfection and dazzling beauty in late medieval miniatures like this from the travels of Marco Polo. In the 18th century, pictorial representations took shape in literary and artistic forms in which the magical and fantastic sense of the past gave way to moralist irony. The 20th century witnessed the exponential growth of the phenomenon with the creation of North American cinematography. And in India, its millenary gods reached the most chromatic and mannerist levels of representation. This brand, so popular today, came on the market 26 years ago. Fate also dictated that same Orwellian year, 6 years before the invention of Photoshop by Adobe, that I would be immersed in this very same chimeric topic. I was 30 years old and furiously carried out photomontages. So when I started exploring painting in 2006, I did so reinterpreting some of those compositions. At first, I used large brushes and a lot of paint, almost directly from the tubes. I was unaware of the mysteries and secrets of this almost new technique for me. Piece by piece, I learned to appreciate the effects of opaque and transparent colors and the richness of combining some pigments with others. The need to use smaller brushes became more and more evident. I learned to not be in a hurry and to penetrate into the mysteries of representing the sky, plants, water. When I was nearly finished with the series, I invited a close friend to see my first paintings which no one else had previously seen. The comment impressed me.
I don't know what the title of Animalois means. I would say that the paintings represent the gaze of evil.
I thought about it. Such was the effect produced by the hybridization of animal innocence with human bodies, attitudes, and environments. The paintings were disturbing, posing more questions than answers. And they needed to be shown in public. 4 years after their completion, some of them have been exhibited in New York, Barcelona, and Miami. 4 paintings have happily abandoned my custody and are in the hands of private collectors. Paintings are like children. We wait for them to leave the nest and carry on with their own lives. That is why they were conceived. This time I formally set out to fragment the compositions a priori, although the final montage would be to recover their original frame. I was seeking a certain spontaneous randomness in bringing together the pieces of each puzzle. Once more, I wanted to start by reflecting on certain photomontages I had composed in my youth, some of them in the distant 1970s.
The victim had shown himself to be more evil than the assassin. The moment in which the latter thought himself to be lying in wait for the former, the victim was seducing the executioner. The victim enchanted, captivated, and then, for a long time, gobbled up the assassin. Having resolved to become a temporary artist, I submerged myself with my head down in what has been agreed upon as a work of art.
I also witnessed the inrush of contemporary realities working themselves into my paintings. For example, the visit to a William Hogarth anthological exhibition was a deciding factor in the caricaturesque and moralist execution of the piece, Conflict in Madrid. And the presentation of the robot Asimo by Honda in Barcelona took shape in another work titled The Sculptor. As I advanced, reality forced me to create completely new compositions. To my surprise, I felt the need to emphasize the perceived grayness of our current democratic state, in which the utopian colors of my youth had faded away. It is therefore not clear if this series represents the discoloration of my country or simply my own aging and acceptance of reality. There is not a time that is unique, but rather several interconnected times. I traveled to Madrid to see the anthological exhibition of Joachim Patinier's work at the Prado Museum. This painter from Antwerp appeared before me as a true revelation in code form to formally exhibit today's globalized world. I then visited the rooms with Flemish paintings, and there, never revealed previously, was this other world in black and white that contains one of the planet's most well-known paintings, The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, a scientifically theocratic representation condemned to invisibility before the open triptych's unquestionable attraction of masses. I needed to make a great effort to paint in the flattest way possible in order to create the landscape only using color.
A landscape is, above all, a composition. It reveals large and small harmonies, most of which are invisible to the people living within the landscape, and who must provide for their immediate necessities of life. The landscape reveals the advantages of distance.
A symbolic creature guards the entrance to the landscape. There are others hidden in the forest. This one is called Selfish and has just drunk water from the spring of rest. Other times, the scale of details is so small that the brushes are tested to the limit. The castaways in the life raft Katrina well deserved a more detailed representation. The world of those lost on Gaia doesn't end well. This detail of the city that burns remains hidden in the Flemish sphere number 2. The first piece to abandon my custody, and which we will visit in its new home. I used Goya in 2 of the paintings from the series Espanas. I did so keeping the attire of the time period. I had to resort to photomechanical reproductions of books and learn to identify the brushstrokes from between the CMYK halftone printing. In doing so, a surprising palimpsest of textures was produced, a mannerist sfumato much closer to Leonardo da Vinci than to Goya. This led me to embark on a new series of small paintings, a collection of present-day journalistic portraits. Characters that Goya painted towards the end of the 18th century would simply interpret the faces of these 21st century human creatures. On this occasion, I continued with the formal idea of a white background, but enlarging the scale of the work. I wanted to consider the arbitrariness of dates on the human cultural timepiece by setting the counter to 0, coinciding with the innocent and fertile goddess of Gaia. 25,000 years ago, human life was feminine and blue. The masculine polygods were attributed animal forms symbolizing concepts. The Egyptian god Horus, for example, represented solar energy, and his icon was the falcon. I wanted to photographically document what the beak of this bird really is like, and using the greens and purples from the magical palette of oil paints, give it an archaeological aspect that would resemble its time period. In the case of the Greek Hermes, the hidden knowledge of the commercial codes took on the mythical appearance of the golden calf. Its surface, smooth and shining in its day, was affected by pressure and suction processes, reaching us with this appearance. Finally, the Semitic cultures stressed the concept of the only true God, although maintaining the masculine role that had been usurped in its day. When I painted this Romanesque child, I was surrounded by open books, all those that I possess on primitive, tribal, and animist representations from African cultures. Don't ask me why. Years have gone by once again. I wanted to symbolically portray the day when Hoffman suffered the accident in his Sandoz laboratory and, when returning home on bicycle, was dazzled by nature. I will explain two keys to understanding this painting in its most formal aspect. These points of light are photos of stars. A trained physicist could determine the distance separating them from our planet by measuring these blue and red half-moons, the result of ultraviolet and infrared measurements. These stars have landed on this surprising form of life of barely 20 inches that lives at a depth of 10,000 feet in Earth's oceans. Last of all, approaching the present, the moment in which we rise and start to look over each other's heads. The all-seeing eye, the representation of divinity in a previous time, is now a technological artifact, although in my painting it is camouflaged in the form of jeweled chromatic Fabergé. This time, Kairos emerged from out of the pages of this little book by Carl Sagan. In becoming aware of the evolutionary process of the human brain, I suddenly discovered that I could count my own vital experiences and autobiograph in 3 paintings the parts that, whether I like it or not, live in my brain. The first one transpires in the dark reptilian environment. It enjoys aggressiveness, territoriality, and ritualistic acts of representation in search of hierarchy. A masculine world of very animalistic instincts. The limbic system initiated the journey of the moths when my organism activated the uncontrollable reproduction impulse. Once again, hidden instincts took over, annulling all shape and form of reason when love appeared. Finally, the neocortex, this milky white half-walnut, tries to control the primitive accesses beneath it and carries out non-stop our very complex present acts. This is where I develop my art, make decisions, and paint.
By integrating the different image fragments, we determine the speed at which the brain processes the accumulated data, which will be expressed in bits per second. In performing this calculation, a maximum processing speed of about 5,000 bits per second is detected. This is the rhythm of art.
And thus we arrive at the present stage of this video, where I am at work on my last series of paintings. It is evident that my eyesight is failing, and optical lenses aid me in my work. One could think that I am painting a Mannerist nano-Pollock. My brushes are minuscule, and my artistic output is very slow. I can hardly advance more than 1 square centimeter per hour. But it doesn't bother me. It's worth it. I'm painting Stanley Kubrick's forehead, with the aspect that the painting would have on a funeral tablet after being buried for 2,000 years. He is one of the 2 filmmakers that will be in my own private cemetery. The Pantheon will house exclusively artists and scientists in transit from the 19th to the 20th century, a very personal selection within my limited Western culture. This eye belongs to Winsor McCay, on whom I will elaborate more. His most well-known piece is probably Little Nemo in Slumberland. I consider this artist to be the great surrealist of the 20th century, and especially for his other series, Dream of the Rarebit Fiend, in which dreams or actually horrible nightmares find their physical explanation in an inappropriate diet at supper time. This vision of a rational artist who pays attention to scientific details takes a determined twist when he embarks on bringing a dinosaur back to life after seeing its fossilized skeleton in a museum. Here is Gertie, now in movement forever. His moral commitment took sides against the barbarity of World War I, evidenced in a visual poem paying homage to the civilians who died with the sinking of the Lusitania. From the first time I saw this film, I could not keep from associating it with Leonardo da Vinci's studies on the movement of water in the 15th century. I am passionate in these matters. Winsor McCay is, for me, one of the world's foremost artists at the dawning of the 20th century, and I cannot fathom why he is not present in the so-called modern or contemporary art museums. Using in a different context the words of Atticus Finch, the literary character of Harper Lee.
Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us not to try to win.
In March 2010, during my first exhibition at the Scope Art Show in New York, I heard a strange comment regarding my work. Maybe it's true that from a few meters away, it looks like a giclée, but this is exactly what I was trying to achieve in painting the iconosphere, renouncing with it any natural reality. I simply ask that you come closer and look carefully at my work to observe the Marxistically artisan details that create it. Painting, just like literature, belongs exclusively to the eyes. It has neither taste nor sound, does not smell, and should not be touched. I live determined to prove that the present can be narrated through the exclusive use of molecular attractions from the past. Not for ecological reasons, although there is some of this involved. In painting, I have found the appropriate language for doing so.